Okay, here's a quick review on perspective and voice from yesterday, plus some additional notes you didn't get yet. So a reminder, the way this is framed is with pictures that are all of the same thing, and they represent different perspectives that we use in literature. So here we go with your first picture. Check that out. Some of you have seen it already, but notice what the picture is showing. And if you haven't seen it, see if you can guess what this picture is of. Okay, this picture represents the objective point of view. In the objective point of view, the author is a detached observer, which means that the author is outside of the story and observes the events that go as an outsider. This means that the author gives no information at all about what characters are thinking and only observes their action and their dialogue. This creates a sense of mystery because we can't see inside anybody's head, so the reader has to infer everything that you know or can guess about what the characters are thinking or feeling. It sounds like they, he, and she, but it's very flat, almost scientific in its observation. So, the girl sat down at the table. She slowly lifted the cup to her lips and took a sip, and then she set the glass back down. And we hear nothing about what the girl is thinking or feeling as she does these things. That's the objective point of view, and it's represented by this picture. Second picture, same thing. See what you notice. Okay, and this picture represents the limited third-person point of view. It's limited because we only see inside one person's head. So the author knows all about what's inside one character's head, everything that that character does and thinks. So now we can hear inside that person's thoughts. It still sounds like they, he, and she, but it also includes things about what the character is feeling. That would sound like, the girl sat at the table. She lifted the cup to her lips and took a sip. She watched the people in the on the plaza. She thought of her mother halfway across the country and wondered what she was doing at this very same moment. You'll notice we still see what the girl is doing, but we also hear the girl's thoughts, so we can see inside that girl's head. And again, that limited third-person point of view is represented by this picture. Third point of view is this one. This is a little weird. Think about again whose perspective these pictures are from. This picture represents the first-person point of view. Necessarily, this is a limited point of view. This is when we see through the eyes of the narrator in the story. The narrator is a participant in the story and tells what happens in the story through his or her own perspective, and it sounds like I. So again, we hear that character's thoughts and feelings, and that character tells us what he or she is doing, but it's limited to that person's perspective. And again, I is the first person. So that sounds like, I sit at a table on the plaza and I lift the glass to my lips and take a sip. I think about my mother halfway across the country and wonder about what she is doing at this same moment. That's represented by this perspective, so you can think about we are seeing through the eyes of our narrator. Clearly then, those three pictures are of the Statue of Liberty, and this represents a different point of view entirely. So in this picture you can see that we can see everything. This represents the third-person omniscient point of view. The word omniscient means all, omni, and scient, like science, means knowing. So in a third-person omniscient perspective, the narrator knows and tells us about everything that all of the characters say and do. So the narrator can be anywhere, can be inside anyone's head. It sounds like they, he, and she, but we can hear everybody's thoughts. So it would sound like this. The girl sits at the table and lifts the glass of water to her lips. As she drinks, she thinks about her mother halfway across the country, wondering what she's doing at this same moment. At that same moment, the mother lifts a cup of tea to her lips and, ironically, thinks of her daughter somewhere in a plaza in Europe, wondering what her life could possibly be like. So in that example, you hear the mother and the daughter, so two very different characters, and we hear both of their thoughts, and that's the third-person, omniscient point of view. Some points of view you haven't gotten to talk about yet that are pretty cool but also more rare are these ones. So the second-person narration, we've heard first person sounds like I, third person sounds like they, he, and she. Second person is weird, and it sounds like you. So this is an example from Bright Light's Big City, which I actually have on my bookshelf. I've never read, but the whole book is written in the second person, and let's just hear what that sounds like for a second. At the subway station, you wait 15 minutes on the platform for a train. Finally, a local, enervated by graffiti, shuffles into the station. You get a seat and hoist a copy of the New York Post. The train shudders and pitches toward 14th Street, stopping twice for breathers in the tunnel. You are reading about Liz Taylor's new boyfriend when a sooty hand taps your shoulder. You do not have to look up to know you are facing a casualty, one of the city's MIAs. So again, second person is the you voice, and we don't hear it very often. It's pretty striking. Another striking kind of narration is called intrusive narration, and that's where we have a narrator who's not necessarily part of the story, probably a third-person narrator, but every once in a while comes in the first person to judge the characters and comment on their actions and motives. One of the best examples of this is the Lemony Snicket series, so you'll hear the narrator come in and comment on the action here. If you were interested in stories with happy endings, you would be better off reading some other book. In this book, not only is there no happy ending, there's no happy beginning and very few happy things in the middle. This is because not very many happy things happened in the lives of the three Baudelaire youngsters. Violet, Klaus, and Sunny Baudelaire were intelligent children, and they were charming and resourceful and had pleasant facial features, but they were extremely unlucky, and most everything that happened to them was rife with misfortune, misery, and despair. I'm sorry to tell you this, but that is how the story goes. There's another kind of discourse that's even more shifty, and it's called free indirect discourse. You won't see this very often in young adult books, but it does happen in some really weird kind of avant-garde adult books. And it's a narration in which the thoughts or speech patterns of a character are kind of stuck into the narration in a first-person way, but without using quotation marks. So for example, Gabriel could not listen while Mary Jane was playing her Academy piece full of runs and difficult passages to the hushed drawing room. He liked music, but the piece she was playing had no melody for him, and he doubted whether it had any melody for the other listeners, though they had begged Mary Jane to play something. You'll notice in the sentence that starts with he liked, all of a sudden we're hearing Gabriel's thoughts, but it doesn't give it in the first person, and there's no quotation marks because he's not actually saying it. It just fits in his thoughts into the rest of the narration. Voice, then, is the author's style. It's the quality that makes his or her work unique and conveys his or her attitude, personality, or character. And for example, in Lord of the Flies, William Golding had a very specific voice. He had a lot of words that he used that made the book sound like that book. However, when we have a book that's told in the first person, like Catcher in the Rye is, the voice is more about the characteristic thought and speech patterns of that first-person narrator. So not the author, but the voice the author gives his or her narrator, which in our case is Holden Caulfield. That creates his persona. So the voice in Catcher in the Rye is designed to give us a sense of who Holden Caulfield is, and that's the voice in a first-person narration. Last, you've got to pay attention to unreliable narrator. So when we have a first person telling us the story, this is like when your friend tells you about things that happened last night and you know that your friend likes to exaggerate a little bit to sound cooler than he or she is. Sometimes we wonder about the credibility of our narrator. So when you have a first person story, we have to wonder how truthful is that person being. Unreliable narrator is when the credibility of the narrator is seriously compromised, and that might happen because of psychological instability, like the person's a little crazy, or a powerful bias. You might not entirely trust the account of a hardcore Trump supporter of how the election is going, right? If you have a really powerful bias, you might not be the most reliable narrator. You might have a lack of knowledge. So sometimes when a little kid tells a story and they tell us about things that are happening, we know that that kid doesn't quite understand enough to give us a truthful account of what's going on. And then sometimes we have an unreliable narrator because the narrator straight up lies to us, and there's a deliberate attempt to deceive the reader or the audience. So all of those reasons might be a reason that we would distrust a narrator or question the reliability of a narrator. And so we're going to go ahead and try that out on a very advanced, sophisticated story right now.